vehicles from hitting each other is for them to have magnetized bumpers, but with the same polarity. So that instead of being attracted, as opposing polarities do, they will be repelled. So yeah, physically impossible for prangs to happen. You see that all the solutions I've provided here are technical by nature, not legal. You don't solve our problems today with politics and laws. That's patchwork at best. The reason for that is because the issue of vehicular collisions, just like virtually all our problems on this planet, are technical, and thus they demand technical solutions. Okay, question 9. The website states, and I quote, "If all the money in the world were destroyed, as long as topsoil factories and other resources were left intact, we could build anything," end quote, and I quote, "all that would be required are the resources and the manufacturing and distribution of the products," end quote. Further they state, and I quote, "free access to the necessities of life," end quote. All very well and good, but how do they get around the issues of the tragedy of the commons? Actually, a very good question, even though I don't agree with the way that it was prefaced. I mean, people tend to say, yeah, all well and good, but anyway, this is actually a question I've never received before, so thank you. From my own understanding of the tragedy of the commons, it is really a formality that we face today on many levels because it stands true in our current value systems. For those who aren't familiar with this, the tragedy of the commons is essentially the predictability of a given resource becoming depleted when a group of individuals are consuming it without restriction or resource management measures. Now, I can understand this person bringing this up, since we advocate a stateless society where control mechanisms are absent, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this would have any validity in an RBE, and here's why. Possibly the key component of an RBE is the shift in value systems towards one that takes into consideration the formality of finite resources, and to shake loose the obsolete and antisocial values which has resulted in this despotism, this segregation and ecocidal destruction that we see all around us. In an RBE, people would actually be mindful of what they consume, because there's a common understanding that, we don't have an endless supply of everything. And also because people would be oriented by needs instead of wants. This combined with the utilization of strategic preservation in all levels, and also redundancy as well, I can't see the constraints of this dilemma having any sway. I mean, for this reason, the tragedy of the commons doesn't apply to an RBE. In fact, I would go as far as to say that the tragedy of the commons is a clear expression of infinite growth versus finite resources that we're facing today. Because that's the point of this dilemma. Consumption ensues irregardless of the state of consumption, recycling methods, regulatory means. It's a case of each individual acting upon their own self-interest. The tragedy of the commons, in my opinion, should be used to demonstrate the efficiency of an RBE, not to question it, because it demonstrates how inefficient our current value system of consumption really is. Anyway, moving on. Question 10. What will be given up to enable this lifestyle? Okay, nothing will be given up. Nothing that's worth keeping anyway. Mostly it will be values that we've been taught which prove to be unsustainable, destructive, and inhumane. The point here is that all humanity will be gaining a standard of living never before seen. I mean, I had a discussion with someone on a train recently where he claimed that to implement an RBE would mean a drop in the standard of living. And, this was mainly because he framed it as though our standard of living is contingent upon, upon our rates of consumption. But I mean, I can understand his point, because we don't have the resources on the planet to maintain our current ways of life. I mean, one thing that I tried repeatedly to explain to him is that while it is true that we don't have enough resources on the planet to provide for all humanity the way we do now, I mean, I think it was, I think the statistic that I came across, if everyone on the planet consumed at the rate that the Americans do, we would need, was it 2 or 3 Earths to sustain the human population? It's ridiculous. But that doesn't address exactly what our current standard of living is actually produced at the expense of. I mean, currently it's a matter of our overconsumption and ridiculous waste that provides our standard of living. If you base our standard of living upon your ability to wantonly consume and waste your resources, then yes, an RBE would be a drop in your standard of living. However, you need to consider what this overindulgent, greedy and wasteful value system has on the rest of humanity that end up with the short end of the stick. Not to mention the state of the planet that you're consuming, or as Danny Shine would put it very aptly and ironically, consume until we have no planet left to consume. Now, in an RBE, the standard of living is based upon needs, not wants, as I've already stated. In a previous podcast, I've elaborated on the difference between those two, but my point is that when you base your life upon needs, then you need far less resources to actually do it, and allow others, in doing so, you allow others to be able to partake of it, and you notice that the planet has more than enough to go around so that every human being can enjoy a high standard of living. I'm sorry to all those who are listening to this that seems that, are telling themselves that they enjoy their overconsumptive lifestyles, but the days of your way of life are numbered. Okay, that's not a threat. Okay, you cannot, it's just fact. I'm just telling you that, we don't have an infinite supply of what you're overly consuming. I mean, you cannot expect everyone else to sit back and progressively have less and less purely because you want to rape this planet of its precious resources. That should be common heritage. Or as Maynard from Tool said in the song Right In 2, don't these talking monkeys know that Eden has enough to go around? Anyway, question 11. Will living in a resource-based economy lead to nothing more than laziness, where people are fat slobs who sit around all day doing nothing and playing video games? What will motivate people? As far as I see it, the acquisition of wealth is the best motivator we have. Okay, as an incentive, money is the poorest excuse we have ever come up with. Now, I'm sorry to say it, but the greatest minds that have endeavoured for the most productive things that humanity has seen have all done it absent of the monetary incentive. I mean, I've answered this question of incentive and money in my first 2 podcasts, so if you wish to know my full take on those issues, you can find them quite easily. I think it's the introduction podcast and the Dispelling Myths podcast. Money serves really as only a satisfactory at best motivator for only mechanical, repetitive and unproductive tasks that require no cognitive strain. I mean, when it comes to intellectual, creative and progressive tasks, the monetary incentive has actually proven to be a massive hindrance. This has been shown in numerous studies on the issue of motivation and incentive. For more information about this sort of thing, I'd recommend the work of Daniel Pink. There was a presentation by him that I watched recently called Drive, about what sorts of things motivate different work roles. I mean, it's a very interesting presentation. Also, to give a further point, at Z-Day this year, Ben McLeish gave a presentation called The Innovation War, in which he gave case studies of how some of the greatest innovators and thinkers of our time have been hamstrung, inhibited, defamed, and eventually destroyed by the pursuit of profit and the maintenance of established institutions of business and income when faced with the liberating force of innovation. And in fact, to quote Ben, I will say that Tesla didn't do it for the money. Armstrong wasn't a radio genius since his teens because of the money. Galileo didn't do it for the money. Martin Luther King didn't do it for the money. If you're doing it for the money, it's probably not worth doing to begin with. Anyway, moving on. Question 12. How would new technology be distributed? Who gets it first? The problem is that unless everyone can get it at exactly the same moment, there is always something with which to barter. It just changes the bartering system from money to technology. Okay, keep in mind here that the context of all these answers are in the time when we've already begun implementing the means and methods of an RBE, as the transition towards it is really starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, understand also that depending on what happens with the collapse and how quickly or slowly humanity realizes the dire need for this direction, you know, it's highly unlikely this will happen immediately following the collapse. You know, it could take decades for us to finally arrive at this decision. You know, as a species anyway. First of all, the technology will be distributed by the most efficient and least time-consuming means at that point in time. We have a collapse of the economy and a transition period between us and that formality, so it's incredibly difficult to say exactly how. The only thing that I can say with any certainty is that sustainability, efficiency, and abundance applied to human concern will be one of the underlying guiding principles for anything that is done. Who will get it depends on who needs it first. I mean, I would say the availability of the technology is going to be the main concern. You know, that is exclusively the resources we need to survive. I mean, meaning food, water, and all the other things that make a high standard of living possible. Question 13. What happens after the collapse? Will we get what we need right away? Okay, the first priority is to do what we can to make sure everyone is provided for. Now, obviously that means getting all the aid required to the third world and raise their standard of living as high as we can. Now, by that I don't mean the same aid that that we've already been doing for decades with infinitesimal positive results. I mean what I mean is the construction and operation of systems like hydroponic vertical farming, and so that starving and impoverished people have the ability to provide for themselves. You know, in my last podcast, Doug Millett spoke about his intention to do just that with his new food company project. You know, we don't need to worry about the Western world at this point, because compared to the third world, we're living like gods. It would just be a matter of resuming at a bare minimum the resource and sustenance infrastructure that we already have. I mean, everyone doesn't need to get everything at the same time, and I agree that that wouldn't be realistic. And yes, there may be a period where there has to exist a barter system in some capacity or other until the needed infrastructure is put in place and operational. But ideally, we would call for the immediate socialization of all systems that are beneficial to our health and our ability to survive. That means healthy food and water, production and distribution, electricity, healthcare, public services, the lot, all socialized. But what that would be is only a temporary stopgap measure to maintain as much continuity as possible before the proper, robust and sustainable infrastructure is up and running. Okay, moving on. Question 14. You said in your first podcast about people stealing to survive, but most things are stolen just because people want it rather than need it. How will